Welcome back for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
This time, we're diving into Kristin Hannah's The Women.
Ah, yes. A powerful story set during the Vietnam War.
And I have to say, the excerpt you all sent over really pulled me in.
It's a captivating book for sure.
So we're going to follow Frankie McGrath, a young nurse who volunteers for Vietnam.
Right. And what's so interesting about Frankie is that her motivation isn't the typical, patriotic fervor.
Not the gung-ho we usually see.
Exactly. It's much more personal for her.
Like she's compelled by something deeper.
Her initial goal is to reunite with her brother Connor, who's stationed there.
So she's drawn there by family ties, but it's obviously not an easy decision for her.
Absolutely not. I mean, she's grappling with the societal expectations of women in the 1960s.
Which were drastically different from today.
Night and day. And she's also carrying the weight of her family's own history with war.
It's interesting. We see that tension play out right from the start.
Many times.
Like when her mother dismisses her interest in advanced biology.
Right. Who cares about frogs?
Oof. Yeah, that line hit hard.
It really encapsulates the prevailing mindset about a woman's role.
Her education and skills take a backseat to marriage and motherhood.
Exactly. So Frankie, going to Vietnam, it's a subtle rebellion against those expectations.
And then there's the conflicting legacy of war within her own family.
Right. Her father romanticizes it. Her mother remembers her own father returning broken.
It's like she's caught between yearning for heroism and fearing destruction.
That tension between hope and fear is there from the very first page.
Hannah really sets the stage for a character wrestling with some serious internal conflict.
Brilliantly done.
So Frankie arrives in Vietnam.
Into a whole new world.
I can only imagine the sensory overload, the heat, the mud, the constant danger.
It's a stark contrast to her life in Coronado.
And you immediately get the sense that she's not at all prepared for what she's about to face.
The novel doesn't shy away from depicting the harsh realities of Vietnam.
There's one moment that really stood out to me. Frankie tries to salute.
Yeah.
Another nurse quickly stops her and warns that Charlie often targets officers.
The Viet Cong, yes.
Even something as simple as a salute becomes risky.
It really highlights the constant threat that permeates life in a war zone.
It's chilling. It's a quick reminder that she has a lot to learn.
Absolutely. Not just medical skills, but the unwritten rules of survival.
Thankfully, she's surrounded by this incredible group of women, the other nurses.
They become her lifeline in that chaotic world.
We see strong figures like Ethel, the tough-talking mentor.
And Barb, whose strength is amplified by the racial prejudice she faces.
I was particularly struck by that detail about them throwing Frankie a turtle party.
A moment of absurd joy in a place where joy seems impossible.
It speaks to their spirit, their ability to find light in the darkness.
Their determination to carve out some normalcy, to hold on to their humanity.
And it emphasizes the power of female friendship, which is a major theme.
Definitely woven throughout the novel.
So Frankie begins working at the 36th Evacuation Hospital.
Which is nothing like the pristine hospitals she might have imagined.
Right, mass casualties, horrific injuries, the constant threat of enemy attacks.
It's operating in the very edge of human capacity.
You can feel that tension in Hannah's writing.
She pulls you right into the operating room alongside Frankie.
You experience the sensory overload, the sights, the smells, the chaos.
It's visceral and it's effective.
There's a moment where Frankie's assisting in surgery and she's suddenly overwhelmed by the smell of diesel fuel.
Triggering a flashback to her brother.
That detail is so powerful, how even in chaos, the personal can break through.
The smells, the sounds of war can become these powerful triggers.
As Frankie gains experience, we see her wrestling with the realities of triage.
Making impossible choices in the face of limited resources and overwhelming need.
Deciding who gets treated and who doesn't.
A heavy burden to carry, and we see the toll it takes.
Absolutely. There's this incredibly moving scene where Frankie breaks down after a brutal shift.
And Ethel, in her gruff way, offers comfort and advice.
That scene was a turning point. It revealed Ethel's vulnerability.
And it highlights the unspoken bond of support between these women.
They're anchors for each other in a storm that threatens to consume them.
A powerful image.
And amidst all this chaos, Frankie finds moments of connection and even love.
With Jamie, a skilled surgeon who becomes a confidant.
It's as if even in the darkest of places, the human need for connection finds a way.
Their relationship is a testament to that resilience.
But this is a war story.
And love and loss often go hand in hand. And in this part, let's delve a bit deeper into the lives of the women who surround Frankie in Vietnam.
It's a fascinating group, for sure. We touched on Ethel and Barb, but their stories are so crucial to understanding Frankie's journey.
They really are. Their lives become deeply intertwined.
Ethel is such a fascinating character on the surface. She's tough, pragmatic, almost unsentimental. But then you see these glimpses of deep emotion.
Especially in her relationship with Frankie.
Exactly. What do you make of her?
I think Ethel represents a generation that's been marked by war. She came of age during World War II, witnessed the costs firsthand.
It definitely shaped her worldview.
Absolutely. Her approach to life, even her advice to Frankie. Remember when she tells her to watch out and take care of herself?
Seems like simple advice, almost dismissive on the surface.
But it's more than that. It's Ethel's hard-won wisdom. She's learned that survival in war demands a certain detachment.
A focus on practicality over sentimentality.
Right. She's trying to shield Frankie in a way from the inevitable heartbreak.
And then there's Barb, whose strength is so compelling, especially considering the double burden of racism she faces.
Both within the military and in society at large.
Her determination to be a visible presence for Black soldiers is incredibly powerful.
Her story really reminds us that the Vietnam War wasn't happening in isolation.
It was interwoven with the fight for civil rights back home.
Exactly. Barb's experiences highlight the intersection of race and gender, adding another layer of complexity to these women's lives.
There's that detail about Barb receiving a Polaroid from her brother Will, depicting a protest against the war.
In Washington, D.C.
A stark reminder of the deep divisions the war created back home.
And how those divisions followed them even to Vietnam.
It's a powerful image. You know, it makes you think about the courage it took for someone like Barb to serve in a military that still reflected those divisions.
She's fighting on multiple fronts for her country, for her community, for her own sense of identity.
It's incredible how Hannah weaves these individual stories together, showing how they converge and diverge against this backdrop of war.
And as Frankie navigates this world, it's clear she's being challenged to confront her own preconceptions.
About race, gender, even the nature of war itself.
It's a journey of growth and self-discovery for Frankie.
She arrives with a somewhat sheltered worldview, but her experiences in Vietnam force her to reassess her assumptions.
And those assumptions are constantly being challenged by the brutal realities of the battlefield.
Hannah's portrayal of the physical and emotional toll of war is just unflinching, both on the soldiers and the nurses.
Especially evident in the operating room scenes.
The descriptions of injuries, the desperate efforts to stabilize patients, the constant pressure of life or death decisions.
It's incredibly intense. You really feel that tension.
I was particularly affected by the scene where Frankie and Jamie are operating on a young soldier who's been shot in the chest.
Covered in blood, exhausted, but they just keep going, driven by this need to save a life.
What does that say about the kind of mental fortitude these nurses needed to have?
I think it speaks to their training, their skill, their sheer willpower, but it also reveals the profound psychological impact of these experiences.
They're witnessing trauma every day, forced to confront the fragility of human life head-on.
And as you said, that constant exposure takes its toll.
We see Frankie battling nightmares, flashbacks, this growing sense of emotional numbness.
Like a part of her shuts down to cope.
Exactly. It's classic PTSD, even though the term wasn't widely used at the time.
And it really captures those invisible wounds of war.
The psychological scars running deeper than the physical one.
And lingering long after the fighting has stopped.
The trauma goes beyond the operating room, too. There's the constant threat of enemy attacks, the ever-present danger.
That scene where the nurses are having a beach party, trying to forget about the war for a few hours, only to be hit by a mortar attack.
Such a powerful moment. It shows how fragile those moments of normalcy are, how quickly they can be shattered.
It really underscores the constant tension they lived with.
It makes their efforts to find joy and laughter even more poignant. They're clinging to these moments of lightness, knowing they could be ripped away.
And their resilience emerges in unexpected ways. That detail about them water skiing in a river always stuck with me.
It's such an absurd image, these women in fatigues trying to navigate that murky water.
But it speaks volumes about their spirit.
It feels like a metaphor for their whole experience, trying to find balance and joy in a world that's constantly trying to knock them down.
They refuse to let the war completely define them.
And the camaraderie that shared experience is what helps them stay afloat.
They lean on each other, support each other, find strength in their commitment to caring for the wounded.
It's a bond forged in the crucible of war.
Absolutely. Hannah does a brilliant job of showing how those bonds are formed. You know, these women have seen things that most people can't even imagine.
And that shared trauma creates a connection unlike any other.
It transcends rank, race, background. They're united by their common purpose and their shared vulnerability.
A powerful testament to human connection.
As their tours of duty come to an end, we see that bittersweet nature of those goodbyes.
They form these incredibly close relationships, but they know they're going back to a world that doesn't understand what they've been through.
That scene where they throw a farewell party for Ethel is so full of mixed emotions, celebration and sadness.
It highlights the transient nature of life in a war zone, the constant coming and going.
The forming and breaking of bonds, there's an underlying sense of impermanence.
And for Frankie, those goodbyes become even more poignant as she experiences personal loss.
The death of her brother Finley is obviously the most devastating.
But we also see her struggling with the departures of Ethel and Barb and the complicated feelings surrounding Jamie.
Each loss chips away at her, tests the limits of her strength.
As she prepares to return home, it seems like she's carrying a mixture of anticipation and dread.
Eager to leave the war behind, but also aware that she's changed, carrying invisible wounds.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore those challenges Frankie faces as she tries to reintegrate into civilian life. Welcome back. We left Frankie at a crossroads, about to head home from Vietnam, but carrying the weight of her experiences and those profound losses she's endured.
It really makes you think what happens when a soldier returns from a reality most of us can't even fathom.
How do you bridge that gap?
Hannah does a great job of highlighting the contrast between the intensity of Frankie's life in Vietnam and the almost surreal normalcy of her return to Coronado.
This is jarring.
She's back in her childhood home surrounded by loved ones, but there's this growing chasm between who she is now and who she was before the war.
There's that scene where she tries to share her experiences with her friends and they just don't get it.
Right, they're more concerned with weddings and the latest fashions.
It must feel so isolating to be surrounded by people yet feel utterly alone.
That disconnect is a major hurdle for Frankie. She's seen and done things her friends can't even comprehend.
Like she's speaking a different language.
Exactly, one they don't understand. And this struggle to connect, to be truly seen and heard, it's something so many veterans face.
Remember when Frankie snaps at her friend Becky? What's happening in Vietnam is no joke. The joke is here.
It really encapsulates her frustration and disillusionment.
She's come back from a war zone, but it feels like the real battle is just beginning.
The battle to find her place in a society that seems oblivious to the sacrifices she's made.
And that battle is further complicated by the shifting tides of public opinion. By the early 1970s, support for the war had dwindled, and many returning veterans were met with hostility.
Rather than gratitude, it's a tragic irony. These men and women risked their lives for their country, only to be rejected upon their return.
Why do you think society reacted that way? What does it say about our understanding of war, especially a war as complex as Vietnam?
It's a tough question to answer. Maybe there's a sense of guilt, a need to distance ourselves from the uncomfortable realities these veterans represent.
Or maybe it's a fear of acknowledging the psychological toll of war, the invisible wounds.
It's definitely a complex issue.
And for Frankie, that rejection is amplified by the fact that she's a woman.
Right. Her service is minimized, dismissed, as if the experiences of women in war are somehow less significant.
It's like a painful reminder of those deeply ingrained societal norms that she's been pushing against all along.
Even within her own family, her experiences are devalued. Her father tells her that true pride comes from caring for her husband and child.
Implying that her time in Vietnam holds less value than traditional female roles.
Exactly. It's heartbreaking.
That even those closest to her fail to recognize the magnitude of what she's been through.
But despite all of this, Frankie is determined to find a way to move forward.
She tries to rebuild her life. She gets a job at a local hospital, even tries to rekindle a romance with Rai, her brother's friend whom she met in Vietnam.
But the war's shadow lingers. She's tormented by nightmares, flashbacks, a constant sense of grief and loss.
Her attempts to fit back into her old life feel hollow.
And her relationship with Rai is further complicated by his existing engagement.
She's trapped between two worlds, neither of which fully accepts who she's become.
It's a difficult situation to navigate.
And as she grapples with these emotional burdens, we see her turning to alcohol and pills.
Seeking solace in substances that only numb the pain temporarily.
It's a pattern we see in so many veterans struggling to cope.
It speaks to the urgent need for better mental health care and support for veterans, especially those returning from conflicts that remain controversial.
Absolutely. And Frankie's story highlights the unique challenges faced by women veterans. Their service is often overlooked, their struggles minimized, and they may face additional stigma when seeking help.
We as a society need to do better in recognizing and supporting all veterans, regardless of gender or the nature of their service.
Couldn't agree more. But despite the darkness and despair, Frankie's story isn't entirely devoid of hope.
Right. She eventually finds a way to channel her experiences into something positive.
She's inspired by the work of the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia, and becomes an advocate for the return of POWs.
That's a pivotal moment for her. She's finally able to use her voice, her experiences to make a difference.
She finds a purpose, a sense of agency that's been missing since her return.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of immense trauma, there's a possibility for healing and growth.
And that sense of purpose leads her to connect with other women who served in Vietnam.
They form a support group, a space where they can finally share their stories and begin to heal.
It's where Hannah's novel really shines a light on those often unspoken experiences of women in war.
For so long, these women have been silenced, their contributions marginalized or ignored.
But through their shared stories, they find strength, validation, a sense of belonging they haven't felt since returning home.
It's a powerful act of reclaiming their narratives, refusing to be forgotten.
Their coming together is a testament to the strength of human connection and the resilience of the human spirit.
Remember that powerful line from the end of the novel, "We were there"?
Such a simple statement, yet it carries so much weight.
It's an assertion of their presence, their significance, their right to be acknowledged and remembered.
A call to action not just for these women, but for all of us.
We need to listen to their stories, honor their sacrifices, and ensure they receive the support and recognition they deserve.
The Women is such a powerful testament to the human cost of war and the importance of recognizing and honoring the experiences of all who served. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading, prompting reflection and challenging our understanding of the complexities of war. It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, the human spirit can endure and find a way to heal and move forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Kristin Hannah's powerful work. We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.